All right, it is 2 o'clock, and so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all to those who've joined a little bit early. We still have folks filing into the virtual room here, but in an effort to be respectful of our time with our panelists today, we'll go ahead and begin today's webinar. So again, thank you to those who've joined. My name is William Moore with OJJDP's INTAC, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you in part by our colleagues at the Innocent Justice Foundation, Shielding Your Well-Being, Moral Injury. Again, my name is William Moore with OJJDP's INTAC, and before we get started, I have a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that we are recording today's web event. Past web events are archived on OJJDP's multimedia page. If you would like to have access to the transcript or any supporting materials, you may do so by contacting the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. Please note that we've provided a Google Drive link in the chat for folks to access the materials related to today's web event. If you're having any issues accessing those materials, please reach out to the help desk. We encourage our audience to please utilize the dial out option through WebEx to connect to your audio. All individuals except for panelists have come in to today's webinar on mute. If you're having any technical difficulties during today's webinar, please be sure to reach out to me, William Moore, and I'll be more than happy to assist you. Please note that we will take questions from the audience as they come in. We ask you to please go to the chat window to interact with our panelists. Select the All Panelist option. Once you select All Panelists in the To field, then you can hit Send and you'll send your message through there. Again, please be sure to select All Panelists prior to sending your message through the chat window. And we can practice that now. Please help us count. If you're viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing with other individuals, other program participants or even colleagues, et cetera, that you have with you, if you could go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today and send to all panelists so that we can get an accurate count of how many that have joined us today. Please remember not to include yourself when you send it. The certificate of attendance will be received by those who are logged in today's WebEx via a WebEx automated email. Please be on the lookout in your email for your certificate. Here's the agenda for today, starting with my opening remarks. On to our moderator, our presenters. We'll have time for a little Q&A, and then we will wrap up. So again, welcome everyone. And please note the following disclaimer here with the project information. And that being said, I'm now going to turn over to Basilia. And a quick reminder to the audience, please, for those who've joined, take a moment to complete the poll in the control panel to your right there. And Basilia, whenever you are ready, feel free to take it away. Thank you.
William. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Victoria Padilla, and I am the program coordinator with the Innocent Justice Foundation at the SHIFT program. Now, our organization was founded back in 2007 to support ICAC teams and their affiliates. And if you're not familiar with the term, ICAC is an acronym that stands for Internet Crimes Against Children. And it was through this partnership that we realized a lot of the heavy burden that many of these professionals face in dealing with a lot of this traumatic material that can be difficult to watch and lead to things like vicarious trauma. It's through this partnership that we have been able to reach out to organizations such as MTech and have these wonderful webinars with our sponsorship by OJJDP. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and pass it on to our wonderful trainers who are going to be discussing this very important topic on moral injury. I'm going to be hanging out in the chat, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. I will open it up again at the end, as William mentioned, for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on there. I will go on off camera and on mute. But take it away, Carol and Dave.
Hi, my name is Carol Brusca, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work with our Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force members. I'm their embedded mental health professional. I also do work with other first responders. I do work with child advocacy centers, with victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, women in recovery. So I had a wide variety of experiences with respect to who I am meeting and whose stories I'm hearing. So I do often hear about people who have had to make a difficult decision that impacted their morals. And so when I heard about moral injury, I started to do a lot more research and discovered that this is really something that is not as well known as I would like it to be. And so when we had the opportunity to share it today, I was very excited. So hopefully you'll get an opportunity to understand what moral injury is and if you've experienced what you can do to work through that. So I will turn it over to Dave. I think you might be on mute, Dave.
Thank you, Carol.
You're
all
welcome.
good now? Thank you. As Carol said, Dave Terry, I've been in law enforcement now for the past 25 years. I worked in Pennsylvania for the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. Currently work for the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office in Cleveland, Ohio. And I've spent the last 16 years specifically working internet crimes against children. I've served as the commander for the statewide task force for about the last 7 or 8 of those years. And, I've gotten involved with innocent justice and, we've started talking more about mental health and wellness because for the longest time, as internet crimes investigators, we really had nothing to fall back on when the material or the work or the offenders that we were dealing with started to become an issue for us. And so, working with Innocent Justice, working with several other organizations has allowed us to create a program and then use some of the material that we're going to talk about today to really move ourselves forward and really make us, better people, better investigators, better prosecutors, civilians, whatever the case may be. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Okay, so the agenda for today, we're going to define vicarious trauma, PTSD, and moral injury and talk about how they're different and what the symptoms are, the signs are. We're going to discuss the signs and symptoms of moral injury and who is typically impacted. We're going to explore and identify coping techniques and tools to use to mitigate these negative effects. And then lastly, we're going to discuss steps to alleviate the symptoms and to heal.
None of this training really is going to matter to you at all unless you remember that, we need to normalize these conversations. We need to break down the stigma for years. And I know when, we as law enforcement officers hear about mental health and wellness, we want to run as far away as possible. And it took a long time for our officers and our investigators to really wrap their head around the idea of talking about it, that we're all in the same boat, that these are normal feelings that we're having, that we're all going through something. And once we embrace that and really smash that stigma, we were all a lot better off. We all came to the table prepared to deal with the issues we were having. We all came to the table willing to talk about those issues. And those people that really were the naysayers in our group, they had the most to say. They got the most out of what we were trying to accomplish, and we're in a better place now than we've ever been in the last 16 years, and a lot of that has to do with the idea and the reality that we can talk about these problems, and that it's an okay thing to deal with. And so obviously, when we talk about mental health and wellness, you've heard a lot over the years about burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. And we talk a lot about vicarious trauma because if you're working in anything that deals with traumatic situations or victims, offenders, witnesses, day in and day out, hearing about their stories and seeing the trauma firsthand. For us as investigators, most of our days are filled with child exploitation material, hearing about it, viewing it, talking to the offenders about it. And so over time, our physical, emotional, our spiritual health takes a toll because, we're hearing other people talk about their problems all day long. I think the interesting thing with vicarious trauma, as you'll see here, is that, it's one thing to hear all that, to deal with all that. It's another while having to control your reaction or your emotions to it. And I see that manifest itself every time I have to go into court. Because as I sit there in a jury box and I present a case to 12, average citizens who've never seen child exploitation material, and I watch their physical reactions, their mental reactions, emotional reactions, that's where I really start to see the effects of this vicarious trauma, because I want to kind of just jump out of the witness stand and, grab the defendant and shake him or her and say, why are you doing this to these people? Understanding that person has a right to a fair trial, but having to control my emotion while I'm going through or thinking of about 100 things that I want to say or do to comfort people and also deal with the offender. That's where you really start to see the effects of vicarious trauma. And obviously, and it's gradual. Okay. It's one day you're just going to realize that, suddenly this has sort of been creeping up and over time, right? It's an insidious process that, one day manifests itself. I've been working, as I said, internet crimes against children for 16 years. And for the longest time, it was just, I don't want to say it was part of the job, but it was something that I would handle. I would deal with the job day in and day out. And then about halfway through the career, 7 or 8 years in, I started to realize that, I was getting tired. There were days that weren't as satisfying as others. And I started to realize that was vicarious trauma that was, kind of creeping in. Compassion fatigue, obviously, is, like the fatigue that we feel when people talk to us about their problems or the issues that they're having. Burnout, we've talked about for years and years, but even before we had mental health and wellness programs in place. And obviously the danger is that, it can be permanent. If we don't do something about it, if we do not address the problems that we're dealing with, you're going to have issues long term. And so it can be prevented, it can be stopped. And that's why these programs are so important, is that we want to be able to talk about these things. We want to be able to recognize the signs and the symptoms and the things that are going on with our own bodies, because we know ourselves better than anybody. And I think that's an important point to take away from today as well.
So what is moral injury? Like it says here, it's a wound to the soul. It's a deep sense of transgression, and it's a violation of consciousness. Several years ago, after there was a psychiatrist working with Vietnam vets, and he was hearing their stories over and over and over again and what they'd experienced and how it impacted them. And what he discovered was what he then coined the term moral injury. And this was it was, like he said, a wound to the soul. It's when someone had to make a moral decision or a decision that was not in alignment with their morals, but they were required to make this. And we're going to go on to talk later on about who can experience this, but maybe there might be a situation in your own life where you had to make a decision that goes against your morals, but you didn't actually want to do that, but it was required. So there's this conflict of having to make the decision even though you don't want to, and then feeling like it's morally wrong, and then having to pick up the pieces after the fact. So Dr. Jonathan Shea, like I said, was working with the Vietnam vets, and he termed the core moral injury, and it's the undoing of the character. So it's when he was working with people that were war vets, and so war can inflict that pain and that wound to good soldiers. The majority of soldiers, I would say 99.9, if not 100%, don't go into battle thinking, I can't wait to kill someone, right? Or somebody else who's having to make a moral decision, a doctor that has to decide, particularly during COVID, which person's going to get the ventilator and which isn't not. That's not what they thought about when they were going in. Am I going to have to decide who's not going to get treatment? That wasn't a moral choice they thought they would have to make. So it's all about the moral choices we have to make when we don't want to, but we're obligated. And then Dr. Brett Litz he was a clinical psychologist working within the VA system. And so Dr. Shea and Dr. Litz together started working on moral injury and what it was about. And he said moral injury as a perpetrating, failing to prevent, bearing witness to, or learning about acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. So what they were talking about is that a moral injury can be something where you have to do something that you don't want to do, or you can't do something that you would like to do. So for instance, and we'll probably go into deeper in this as we move on, but if I'm a firefighter and there's 2 people in the house and I can only save one, it's going to be a wound to my soul if I have to know that one of them is going to die. So it's against my morals to have someone die, but there's nothing I could do about it. So it's that type of thing. I'm just trying to kind of lay the foundation for what moral injury is. It's when we have to make a choice that impacts our moral belief system. And we might not realize how strongly our morals impact our day-to-day decisions, or, you know, it could be that we do, but when push comes to shove and we're in a position where we have to make that choice, then there might be some hesitancy. And if we have to make that choice and it does go against our morals, that can be something very long-term. So it's different than vicarious trauma, because vicarious trauma is something where we witness someone else's trauma, and then we take the consequences from witnessing someone's trauma. Moral injury is caused, like it says here, caused by direct participatory event. So we had a part in this, and that's why it caused us trauma. On the other hand, vicarious trauma is we were witnessing someone else's trauma that we experienced. Moral injury is a transgression to moral beliefs, values, or ethical codes of conduct, which is very different from vicarious trauma. It's about, it can impact our worldview and spirituality. It can impact, like Dave said, every area of our life. So moral injury is much more, it's an active thing. Even if we choose not to do something, we are actively choosing not to do that. So moral injury is where we have had to make a choice to do or not to do. Vicarious trauma is much more, we were not a participant, we were the observer, and in that realm, as the observer, we were impacted. So there's certainly similarities. All of them can start with witnessing a traumatic situation. So, for instance, if I was the firefighter and I was witnessing the situation where someone else there was 2 people in the fire, and I see that one is in agonizing pain, and maybe they're choking because of smoke or whatever the circumstance is, but I can only save one. That second person and the first person, their story can still stick with me because they were going through something very traumatic. So that could be something that could be vicarious trauma. Now, if I could take them both out, but I kept remembering the story and the images of them in that fire and the trauma they were going through, that could be vicarious trauma. If I'm witnessing the same exact thing and then I don't have the opportunity to save them both, that can turn into moral injury. So the symptoms can be similar in that our worldview beliefs can be damaged. The symptoms would be grief, guilt, shame, betrayal, loss of trust. All of those can be the same in both. And it is possible to have moral injury but not meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, because post-traumatic stress disorder thinks of it in terms of the person who was experiencing that trauma and how that directly impacted them, as opposed to something where they witnessed it instead. So post-traumatic stress disorder, as it says here, is psychiatric disorder that can occur in people who've experienced or witnessed a traumatic event, and how that plays in is that this could be a natural disaster, a serious accident, terrorist act, war or combat, a rape, someone who's been threatened with death, sexual violence, or serious injury. I could experience PTSD if I went into the gas station and somebody came in and robbed the gas station when I was there. I could experience PTSD if I was in an abusive relationship. I could experience PTSD if I was in the military and just being around all of that, all of the incidents that happen in war. I could experience PTSD if someone was tormenting me. So maybe it could be someone online was tormenting me. So maybe they were kind of stalking me. I could experience PTSD under any of those circumstances. So those are all very different from what we'd expect with moral injury and with vicarious trauma. So PTSD is typically we are firsthand experiencing that. We are not the bystanders. So the difference between moral injury and PTSD is moral injury is not yet recognized as a diagnosis. And in the DSM-4, which is our the psychiatric Bible, that's the one we go by. So it's not yet recognized as a psychiatric diagnosis, and more than likely that's because they haven't done a new revision, and it's not as well known or as well researched as PTSD and as vicarious trauma. So not recognized as a psychiatric diagnosis. It's a bruise to the soul, akin to grief or sorrow, lasting impact on the individual, whereas PTSD, it is recognized as a psychiatric disorder, and the individuals within that situation can experience intense, disturbing thoughts and feelings related to their experience that last long after the event. So again, if I'm in a situation where it's not even something where I saw something extremely violent, I could be feeling very vulnerable, or it could be that if I was being stalked, maybe that person never, ever, ever laid hands on me, or I never actually saw them. But it's the intimidation factor, it's the terrorist piece of that that can cause me the PTSD. So every time I go outside, I'm very scared, and I check both ways, and I check, to see if anybody's in my car. That could be a PTSD situation. A moral injury situation would be very different. That would be something where I had to make a decision. So again, moral injury, we're active in that. We're making a decision to do something or to not do something. PTSD, different because we are a victim of something. We are a victim of trauma that impacts us to the point where we can't get rid of those images in our head, that we perseverate on them. We might live those over again and again and again and again, and they keep popping back up into our head, which is again different from vicarious trauma, because vicarious trauma is trauma that happened to someone else. So we have several different types of trauma here. There might be a little bit of overlap in each of them, but they're all very distinct. The moral injury, again, is not recognized as a psychiatric diagnosis, and PTSD is.
And, Carol, I think it's important, and I'll, admittedly, before I started really working in this area of mental health and wellness, you associated PTSD with, soldiers who went off to war and came home and had problems dealing with the after effects. And I think, we've talked a lot over these last few slides here about trauma, and we showed you some examples of, natural disasters, terrorist acts, serious accidents, rape, murder, and those are obviously traumatic. But I think it's important to recognize that, trauma is different for everybody. With the work that we do with child exploitation and child abuse offenders, some of the folks that have worked for us, for them, it's a few images. It's, one individual that they help, and they realize that this isn't for them, or the effects of the material becomes a lot more for them than it may for somebody else. And so, I like where in that last slide, it talked about a bruise on the soul as it related to moral injury, because I think that's really what a lot of us feel at times, that, we have to make a decision as investigators in terms of what case are we going to work. The workload now is just enormous because of COVID and the way that the internet is changing. And so sometimes it falls to us to decide, is this the case I'm going to work, or is it another case? And, we have to make that determination with the realization that there might be other cases out there that are not getting the due they deserve, or there may be other victims that we're missing. When you're looking at 1,000 cases a month, you recognize in some respects that there are these needles in the haystack that, we may have trouble finding. And I think that's really where, moral injury comes into play. But I don't always like the word trauma because I think it minimizes some of the smaller issues that occur and some of the other things that, maybe we don't necessarily think is traumatic, but to somebody else are affecting them in a certain way.
And I think, Dave, you brought up a fabulous point that definitely in ICAC work there can be moral injury, because if you're having to choose, and part of the nature of your job is because you've got so many cases coming through, oftentimes you have to triage, and you don't know every detail of everything before you triage necessarily. And that can be a moral injury. If you find that you chose one because it felt like it was a more solid case and you didn't choose another, that could be a moral injury right there. Absolutely. That's a great point. So some of the similarities here, both can start with life-threatening situation. Again, both can start with a situation that will cause harm to self or others, and symptoms can be similar. So symptoms can be similar with respect to moral injury, PTSD, and vicarious trauma. There can be a huge increase in anxiety. There can be sleeplessness. There can be perseverating about the event. There can be flashbacks of the event. There can be times when you just can't get it out of your head. You can be tearful or sad or resentful or angry. You can feel grief. All of these similarities are across the board for each of these different types of anxiety-provoked situations, even though they might have started with a very different situation. And like it says here, they can start with a life-threatening situation, but again, it can be potentially very, very different. So for PTSD, it might be that I was in the gas station when somebody came in to rob the store. It could be if I was, the first responder and I'm try to save as many as I can, but I can only save one. That can be the situation there for moral injury. And then for vicarious trauma, I could be somebody who was at the gas station watching the attendant behind the counter get harassed or maybe shot or something happens. And so even though I was not part of that, maybe I was sitting in my car and I saw the whole thing happen and my life was actually never in danger, my brain didn't know that. And so my brain took on all of the experiences, and that would be vicarious trauma. So how does moral injury occur? So it can be what's called an act of commission. It can be an act of omission. And how this happens is an act of commission is when someone does something that goes against their beliefs. Now, this could be anything that we had to do that we would not have otherwise done given different circumstances. So if I'm in a situation where I have to make a choice, so I have to choose where I have to choose that, or I have to make a decision, like if I'm in a battle and I see a child standing by the side of the road and I have to choose to drive past them, even though they're holding up a sign that says they're hungry, I have to choose to drive past them because I know that that could be someone who has, if I stop, then bombs can be thrown at me, or something could happen where my life and the life of my troops could be in danger. An act of commission is something that when we do intentionally do something. And even though it's intentional, it doesn't mean that it doesn't go against our beliefs and our morals. So it could be if I'm the doctor and I decide that the 80-year-old patient doesn't get the ventilator and the 60-year-old patient does, or the 30-year-old patient does. So I'm choosing to do something that goes against my beliefs. My beliefs tell me as a doctor to support, to help everyone and never do any harm. Well, by doing something and giving this person something, it's going against my belief system. So it's the act of doing something intentionally that can potentially cause harm. So maybe, for instance, and I doubt that the likelihood of this would be very slim, but if I was working in a prison system and then I was assigned to be the doctor who had to inject the person on death row. And so I'm doing something that goes against my moral beliefs because maybe I don't support killing people, but I'm required by my job to do that because that's what my job is. So the act of commission means you're actually doing something that goes against what you want to do. The act of omission is when someone fails to do something in line with their beliefs. So my belief is to save everyone as a firefighter, and then I can't do that. My belief is to save everyone as a doctor, and I can't do that. So these are the things where we want to act, but we're not allowed to. And the act of commission is when we don't want to act, but we have to. So when someone fails to do something in the line of their beliefs, someone may perpetrate, fail to prevent, or witness events that contradict deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. So maybe it's something that we wanted to do, but there was not an opportunity for us to do it, or we didn't do it because other things weren't allowing us to happen. So maybe we wanted to save the child when we're driving down the road in our tank as a military person, but we've got our supervisor, boss, our general, whoever it could be, and they're saying, drive on, drive on, drive on. And so we have to do that. Individuals may also experience betrayal from leadership, others in positions of power, or peers that can result in adverse outcomes. So if I go to my supervisor and talk about the struggle that I'm having because I really didn't support the decision that I had to make, and they don't support me in feeling that way, or if I have to do something by commission or omission, and then because I was told to by my boss, and then it turns out that my boss throws me under the bus and says I'm responsible for that even though I was following orders, that can be when we experience betrayal from leadership. So surviving the harm or death of someone else, that's another opportunity when we were not able to help. So if I was climbing in the mountains somewhere, and I know that our rations just roll down the mountain, and so we can no longer survive. And so I know there's enough food for both of us for a day or two, but then there's not going to be help along the way until many more days. And so my partner says, just let me die because you've got a stronger chance, you've got kids, or whatever the case might be. And so I do something that I would not normally do, which is divide the food up, but I end up surviving, and then I have the consequences of that by thinking maybe I should have just given him all the food and then give up my own life, because now I've done something that goes against everything that I believe in, and then I'm having flashbacks about that, and I'm having grief, and I'm having guilt because that person died and I survived.
Well, and Carol, as you look at two of those right there, two of those bullet points, someone may perpetrate, fail to prevent, witness events that contradict deeply held moral beliefs and expectations, and then also betrayal from leadership, position of power, peers that can result in adverse outcomes. And I think about social media. I think about the current state of society and politics, and what we're seeing in the online environment right now. The question becomes then, how often are we morally injured just because by what we see in the course of a day or what we're exposed to in the media today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the moral injury workbook, this information comes from the moral injury workbook. And if you feel like you've experienced moral injury, I highly recommend that you get this. It's very, very useful. So this kind of lays it out. So the act of commission is actions you can take that violate your own deeply held beliefs, And then if it's an act of commission by you, it's your actions you can take to violate your own deeply held belief. It's an act of commission by someone else. It's actions taken by others that violate your deeply held values. So, for instance, if you were in a situation where, again, if you're a firefighter and you took one person out and your partner who was supposed to grab the other one didn't do that, they are, or they chose to help someone else. There's two people and they chose to go and help somebody else that was in a different area of the house or something. Their act, the act that they took, violated my deeply held belief. The act of omission, it's me failing to act in line with my own belief system, or act of omission by someone else, failure by others to act in line with your deeply held values. So this all relates to my values, and me not doing something or doing something that goes against my values, and then me seeing someone else do something against their values or not do something. So it relates to, it's even though the person that I'm with, the other, doesn't necessarily have the same values that I have, them taking that action that violates my deeply held belief by commission or omission, that can cause me to feel the guilt from a moral injury.
And there's several compounding factors. I talked a little bit about, that last bullet point there about, really the unclear nature of the right and wrong choices that we make as law enforcement officers. Those of us who are faced with, hundreds of cases a week, a month, deciding which one we're going to investigate first. Obviously, we may have cases and they all may include crimes. We have to decide which ones of those are more important. So, in that situation, neither of them is a right or wrong choice. As we look at today's society and people sharing their opinions and their feelings more and more out there in the world, maybe it forces us to reconcile with our own individual beliefs. Do they go with or against, prevailing trends, prevailing, current opinion in society? And we may have some unresolved feelings of shame and guilt around the choices that we're making or our own individual beliefs. I think the biggest factor, though, and really the reason that we're, pushing these topics more and more is that, some people don't have that opportunity to talk with someone else or to process with someone else. My first 7 or 8 years working internet crimes against children was very successful, but not without its own struggles and issues that I had. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, back then there were a very small handful of us who were working these cases. I had a partner, but in terms of the area we covered, that was it for half of the state of Pennsylvania. And so there weren't a lot of people that we could talk to or process what we were going through with. We had no mental health or wellness program in place at the time. And so it wasn't until, the last few years where we started to roll this program out and to have someone to talk to and just be able to process it with somebody. It's not always about having a mental health professional like Carol to talk to. Sometimes it's just having your coworkers, your boss, friends or family members that can understand what you're going through and provide you that opportunity to release.
So some signs and symptoms that we might see. Some people experience questions of moral injury right after the experience. So, or maybe it could happen while I'm in process. I'm already having that, the experience right then. I'm already feeling like this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel right. Or it could be right after the incident and I'm going over it in my head and I'm starting to think about it and then I begin to feel worse and worse and worse. Sometimes for other people, issues won't surface for years. It could be one of the reasons that could happen is because if I have a change in my moral belief system, I might have believed something when I was younger, and then as I got older, I might have changed my views, and that could be the situation. So it could be you know, I was talking to a group of people several months back, and we were talking about moral injury and when do our morals about things change. And there was a person there that said for them, they had a change in what they believed was morally right and wrong. And when they were a young teenager, when she was a young teenager, she had an abortion, which at the time she believed was morally right. And then as she got older, she felt that it wasn't morally right. She thought that that decision was the best decision given the facts and everything that she could do given that time. But she said if the situation came up now years later, she would not make that the same decision. So sometimes we have situations where our morals change over time, and that can be one of the reasons why issues don't surface for years. It can be one of the reasons why when we change our moral belief system, we have a different view. And, you know, throughout our life, there is times when our morals might change, and it doesn't mean they always change to become more conservative. It could be that some of our morals change so that they are not as conservative as we used to have them. So it's not one direction. It's bi-directional. We can change, you know, in either direction. But if that's the case, we might not have even thought about it. So if we were a soldier, 18-year-old soldier in the military, and we had to do something that was an act of commission or omission, and we just kind of put it down to that's what I got to do because I'm a soldier. Then years later, it started coming up again because maybe our child was going to go off to the military, and then it started to pop up, and we thought, wow, that was really tough for me to have to make that decision. And really, in hindsight, that went against my morals, and I would hate to have my child in that same kind of predicament. So it can be something that pops up right away. It can be something that takes a long time to surface. Like it says here, an experience with potential for moral injury is typically realized after a change in person's moral codes or belief systems. And as we grow and age, oftentimes, I mean, there can be slight or drastic changes in our moral system. Moral injury is subjective and personal. So what I feel my morals are is not exactly the same as what Dave feels his are, or what Basilia feels hers, or any of you. It's my own belief system, and it's very tied to who I am, how I view the world, what's important to me, and the things that I want to achieve. So there's, it does, you know, differentiate in that way. So some of the initial things that we might initially feel despair. We might feel some outrage. So initially we might be very, very angry. We might just be stressed out and angry and confused that we made this decision, and then why are we feeling this way, and what's going on that we're having all of these feelings, and then we're mad because we had to make a decision by omission or commission that we didn't want to make. There can be feelings of despair. So that might be because we felt like we didn't have any options and we made the only choice that we could, given our lack of options. And due to that, we're feeling a lot of despair. There can be a lack of trust in others. So if we felt like we made a decision and then our upper management didn't have our back and they're kind of throwing us under the bus, there's obviously going to be a lack of trust in others. Or maybe we figure, you know, I had to make this decision that goes against my morals, and other people were around me, and they could have at least made me feel like I was supported in the moment, but they just stood there not saying anything. So that could lead to a lack of trust in others. It could be that we start to self-medicate. So if we're feeling really bad and we don't want to think about the circumstance or the situation, and it keeps popping up in our brain or it won't leave our brain, and so we start to self-medicate as a way to protect us from having those painful thoughts come up. And it can lead to a relationship breakdown. And this can happen because if we are feeling that disconnected and we're feeling all of these emotions related to having our own moral code broken, then it's going to be harder for us to feel that we can connect with others. And if we aren't able to talk about it, that's going to break down our relationship communication, and it's kind of going to just spiral out. So some other common reactions we can have, it can be guilt. We can have shame, disgust, anger. Disgust was on the other page. It's this whole idea that all of these emotions, and these emotions are directed at us. So we feel disgusted with ourselves. We just feel disgusted with the situation. We feel shame that we had to make this decision. We feel shame for other people around us who didn't intervene. There's lots of anger because we had to make a choice we didn't want to make. And then there's guilt. And this guilt can be knowing that we had to do something we would have never done, or we didn't do something when we really wanted to. So the guilt can involve feelings of distress and remorse regarding the morally injurious event. So like, I did something bad. That's very common. Or the shame is when the belief about the event generalizes to the whole self. So I made this decision, which equals now I am a bad person overall. And so that one incident now becomes the defining moment in our lives, and we use that and look through that lens of shame now to define everything in our life. And obviously disgust can occur as a response to memories of the act, and anger may also be another feeling that we have. So it's, really struggling with what we do and how we do it, and then all of these reactions, which then we don't really even know what to do about, right? So we're feeling guilt and shame and disgust and anger, and we're turning this inward, and we can't get away from ourselves, right? So if I was feeling disgust and anger at someone else, then I could just stay away from them. But then when you're feeling this, and then because of this, you begin to isolate, and the more you isolate, the more those thoughts and feelings percolate over and over and over again. That just perseverates the whole thing and makes it even worse. So these are unfortunately common reactions.
I think also these are going to have an impact on your spirituality. And I know when we talk about spirituality, people initially think of religion and faith, but I mean, really it's more about, the human quality and wanting to better yourself and better humanity. But I know there's times where we will question, what's going on in the world. Like how can this happen, or why is this happening? We don't have necessarily an answer for it. I became a chaplain several years ago, not really out of a desire to be more religious, but just to have a better understanding and a better sense of, spirituality and why things are the way they are. And then importantly, how, we can deal with it. And so, there are times where obviously these reactions are all very common. I look at these last two slides and, I can think of several times where I've gone through those reactions in the course of, my law enforcement career, and some of them weekly, because we're outraged at certain things. We despair, Carol talked about upper management. I mean, I've said for years that the biggest issue for me is not the offenders. It's not the victims. It's not the material we view. It's the fact that, bureaucracy sometimes makes it harder for us to do our job. And, if we were just left alone to the, experiences and the expertise that we know and how we know how to do our job, sometimes we would be able to get through it. So these are all very common reactions to the issues that we're talking about.
So some of the other common reactions here is the inability to forgive ourselves. So we feel like even though we were kind of forced in a corner to make a decision that goes against our morals, we still feel like we should have made a different decision. So I might not have had the choice to save two people from that fire, but then I try to convince myself that if I tried harder, if I worked smarter, if I had been there earlier, all of those what ifs that we go through, that I could have done it. And so it's the inability to forgive myself for the choice that I made at that time. And sometimes it's emotional numbing. Sometimes we just go numb and we have no feeling whatsoever. And that's just because all of the feelings that we've had are so strong and overwhelming that we just put on this kind of shield so we don't have to feel our emotions. And so we do things, sometimes we might drink, or sometimes we might hide in other activities so we don't have to think about the event, and we become emotionally numb. Or we could actually isolate from the rest of our family and our friends and just stay away because we are beating ourselves up over the event that occurred, and we don't feel like we are allowed or worthy to be around others. We cannot forgive ourselves. We feel like we don't deserve that, or we worry if we're in public and people ask us about that, that's going to drudge it all up again and make us feel bad. So all of those things can happen. And then, again, like Dave was talking, the worldview, and I'll let him catch up on that, but also the sense of betrayal. It's that betrayed by ourselves, betrayed by upper management, betrayed by others that might have come in to support us, and just an overall sense of betrayal by everyone. Betrayal for people who didn't recognize the magnitude of how this impacted you, and then they go on with their life as if nothing. And so people that just don't understand or don't feel the same. Did you want to say anything about worldview, Dave?
No, I just, I think in terms of society where we are now, I mean, I look at the last few years from as a law enforcement officer and just how difficult it's become in terms of maybe how we're feeling sometimes when we look out into the world and we see, what the world says about police officers or criminal justice professionals or those that are, trying to do right against a backdrop of a small minority that, maybe does wrong or is policing poorly from time to time. And so, that really can have an impact. Carol talked about the emotional numbing and the social isolationism. I mean, the reality that, sometimes when I go out and people ask what I do, there's a hesitancy at some times to talk about, what my career is. Now, obviously, when I start talking about protecting children and the dangers of the internet, people seem fascinated by that. But at the same time, it can be very difficult to go out and talk about that. It can be very difficult to be reminded of that, as Carol said, day in and day out. And so, for some of us, COVID was a godsend because it allowed us to kind of, isolate with people that we know and trust and love. And, we spent a lot of time inside working cases and trying not to be out in the world. But I mean, when we ultimately went back out, it all really came rushing right back. And, I think in some respects it did have quite the impact on our worldview. And, that's why it's important to, again, process and talk, because once we were able to do that, we started to come back to, pre-COVID or times when we were, reminded why we got into this line of work in the first place.
And there's different types of betrayal. We talked to the previous slide about betrayal. There's different types. So we can have the interpersonal betrayal, and that's the people that you expected to be there for you were not there. So you expected them to respect you or to protect you or to support you. And this could be people like your family members, like others that you lean to, and you go to them and you say, this is what happened and I'm feeling really bad, and they don't know what to say. And it's not always their fault that they don't know what to say. It's how do you respond when somebody said, I had to make this decision and I feel awful about it and I don't know what to do. And if you're hearing that, what do you say? There's no, you can't change things. They were forced to be in a position. And so interpersonal betrayal, if they try to get you to just forget about it because they don't understand how to help you, or they just tell you that you did what you had to, and all of these ways for them to try to just tell you to get over it because they don't know what to say. And that can be interpersonal betrayal. Institutional betrayal is on the larger scale. So if you were doing this and it related to your job, if you felt like the institution did not support you or they left you hanging after the incident, that's going to be institutional betrayal. So it could be that you feel like your company didn't have your back, or the other people working with you didn't have your back. And so they just weren't there to support you, or they threw you under the bus and said, why'd you make that decision when you made that decision based on what you were told to do? So both of those can cause institutional betrayal, and interpersonal betrayal can be caused when people are reaching out for help from an interpersonal position and not getting what they need. Do you want me to start, Dave?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So who is at risk for this? So anyone can experience moral injury. Anytime you have to make a moral decision. So it could be a moral decision like you're driving down the road and it's a rainy night and there's two cars and you know you're going to have to hit one. What do you hit, the semi truck, or do you hit the you hit the minivan? You don't want to hurt anybody, but sometimes you're in a position where you don't have that choice. Or maybe you come up first on an accident scene and you're not even a first responder, but you go out and try to help somebody and it doesn't, and you can't help in the way you'd like, whether it's by omission or commission. Anyone can experience it. Service member, these people are most common in this experiencing it. So it could be service members that experience this because the nature of their job is to do something that many of us would find go against our morals. So if you are, as part of your job, required to kill people, and that's against your morals, that's going to be harder for you, and they're going to be more at risk because, again, the majority of people don't want to kill somebody else. Justice professionals, so that could be anyone in the law officers, that could be anybody in that field. That could be, it could even be someone who is working as an attorney, and someone working as an attorney has to decide, or maybe it's a judge and they have to make a decision that goes against their morals, but there wasn't enough information in the case that they could make a better choice. So somebody comes before the court and the person doing the defense or the person that was doing the defense had a really great case, and the person that was the other attorney didn't have such a great case, and so the person got off for doing something that you feel in your gut they did, but you couldn't convict them because you didn't have the information, because their attorney didn't bring up the information. And so that could be something, again, that goes against your morals, but it was a choice that you had no choice but to make. Medical staff, anytime I think about this over and over again at COVID, when there was decisions that had to be made related to who could be saved and who couldn't. Anytime you're in a situation where there's a limited supply of resources, and so you have to be the one that decides who's going to get those resources, that puts you at risk for moral injury. First responders, firefighters, ambulance drivers, EMTs, anybody who's first on scene, they can have moral injury. And officers on the street, people doing the beat cop, if they're out there and they're, again, they don't want to have to shoot somebody, and if someone is coming at them and they feel obligated to do that because it's them or us, they might shoot them and then feel the moral injury after the fact. Probation and parole staff might feel this if they are not able to protect their parolee or protect the public from their parolee or their probation individual. Child advocacy can experience this. If you're working what we call CYFD here, so working in a system where you are the Children, Youth, and Family Department, and you have real concerns about a child being left in the home, but you cannot take them out because there's not enough evidence or enough information. And then later on down the road, you find out that your gut was right and something has very dangerous happened to that child. All of those things can cause moral injury. So like it says here, anyone can experience moral injury.
Yeah, and I think those last two are really overlooked. I mean, obviously, we look at service members, first responders, medical staff. It's easy to see where that occurs, but like just being from Cleveland, our child advocacy centers are overworked. Our children and family services division is overworked. There's more offenders than there are for probation and parole staff to adequately manage, and so I think the system lets it down at the same time, but we just say to ourselves, oh, that's their job. That's what these probation officers, these parole officers signed up for. But we don't often think about the fact that, can they adequately handle what they're faced with? The number of children who need, emergency care from a CFS or a DCFS standpoint. There are times where obviously those workers are forced to make decisions about, do I go out and make a house visit? Is this something that can wait? Is there other family members that can deal with this child, or do I need to step in and make an emergency situation and remove that child? And those are tough decisions to make when you're in that situation there. So
And so again, here's some high risk situations. So, if you freeze, when we talk about experiencing a traumatic event, either vicariously or actually, and we talk about fight, flight, freeze, some people do freeze, and it's not intentional, but we freeze. And so freezing or failing to perform a job or a duty during a dangerous or traumatic situation, that could be a high risk situation. Another high risk situation is where there's lots and lots of emotion and things are moving at a very fast pace. It could be that if there's others at risk, that can make it a high risk situation. So if it's just one individual, very different than in the situation where there's multiple individuals that you're going to have to deal with. So any of these times, any of these situations where there's an event that's happening and it's very fast paced and you are trying to keep up, or it's a dangerous situation, or engaging in or witnessing acts of disproportionate violence, all of these are high-risk situations. Killing or harming someone in the line of duty, making decisions that impact the survival of somebody else, freezing or failing to act in a dangerous situation, and then not reporting an event as well. That is another act of omission, but it puts people in a very high-risk situation.
yeah, I think as we see more and more crime and less law enforcement professionals, I mean, we're trending toward this perfect storm if we're not already in it, where we've talked to a lot of officers in the field who say, hey, I know you're sending me some good cases and I want to get to them, but I'm the only guy in my department that's investigating these. I have 30 other cases ahead of this. And so, we recognize that we're creating, some of these high risk situations, not that they're, violent crimes or situations where we're running into a burning building or saving someone from a traumatic incident out there in the field, but that, we're creating situations just because of the workload and the personnel decreases and other issues that, as we talked about earlier, kind of compound these problems.
So what do we do to mitigate the effects? We can support following an event could look like this. If we have protective factors like humility, gratitude, respect, and compassion, that's going to help us to mitigate the effects. So having that and then being able to say, okay, I am grateful that I was able to save 3 people, although I wanted to save 4, or I have respect for myself and my decisions I make, even though I am not happy with the ones I made, or having compassion, the ability to say, I would like to reach out to someone else to let them know how much I care for them given this circumstance. So all of those things are ways to have compassion, humility, gratitude, and respect. So what do we do? How do we heal? Talk therapy. Talk therapy is going to be a useful thing. Then we can talk about our experience and have someone hold that space for us and let us talk about it and not feel like they have to fix us. So it's going to be very useful in that way. Art is something that the people that first discussed moral injury said was very, very important. We can also look at writing. We can look at talking circles, spiritual gatherings, and treating the shame. So if we start with treating the shame, then that can expand off into other arenas. And then again, feeling you are worthy of love, recognizing that we do need to forgive ourselves in order to move forward. We do need to accept ourselves and the circumstance in order to move forward. We need to have compassion for ourselves, and then we need to see what can we do to make amends. It's not always going to be possible. If this was a situation where we didn't know anybody that we were in circumstance with, making amends is going to be very, very difficult to directly do that. So maybe this is a situation where we have to kind of make amends by writing a letter that we never send, or just, doing some sort of act of kindness for someone else as a way to make amends for the experience that we put someone else through, or the experience that we were not able to act on, or act on in a way that was not the way we would have liked to.
Yeah, and so sometimes it's as simple as just being more mindful, right? It says they're making sense of the pain. I mean, I think in some respects that's simply just trying to understand it, or being mindful of what's going on. Prayer is helpful. Prayer is not always like actual praying. Sometimes it's just it's meditating. It's sitting there silently. When I started having issues years ago, I went to my priest, and I wasn't Catholic at the time, and I really had no interest in what he had to say. But ultimately, he said, listen, just spend some time with yourself. He goes, I'm not going to tell you that you need to find God and start praying every day and 5 times a day, going to church every single day. He started out by just saying, hey, just find some time for yourself, go somewhere quiet, and just be with your thoughts. And in some respects, that's prayer. It doesn't need to be anything formal. It can be just you talking out loud to whoever it is you talk to. I don't meditate. Carol talks a lot about the benefits of meditation. For me, sometimes it's just sitting in my car for 5 minutes. I'm not on a mat. I'm not. I couldn't cross my legs if you paid me $100 to. But sometimes I'll sit there in my car before I go to work, or at the end of the day. It's my 5 minutes to kind of meditate and just try and make sense of everything that's either about to occur or that has already occurred.
So another way that we can think about healing, dialogue without judgment. So that could be dialogue, internal dialogue with ourselves, showing some self-compassion, dialogue with someone else. And if we have someone in our life that we know we can have a conversation with and it won't be judgmental, sitting with them, or going to a therapist who is supposed to be non-judgmental. So having that space being held. Listening deeply. So if someone says, what can I do? You can listen deeply. You can sit there and hear me and really listen so that you can hear all the nuances of what I have to say. Sharing and listening can vary by culture and spiritual tradition. So whatever that looks like to you, what is going to make you feel better as an individual? And then sharing with others who had similar experiences. So is there somebody out there that had an experience similar to what you had that you can talk to, because they will be the ones that can relate?
And that's what I mentioned earlier, right? That, those people you work with, if you're experiencing issues, or you're experiencing moral injury or compassion fatigue or burnout, I guarantee you those other people are as well. And so, when we finally came together as a group and sat down, I mean, the benefit of being able to, share with other people who had those similar experiences was extremely beneficial.
So how do we heal? This quote comes from the book, the Moral Injury book. So moral injury could be absolved when the trauma survivor is permitted and empowered to voice their experience. Fully coming home would mean integration into a culture where one is accepted, valued, and respected, and has a sense of place, purpose, and social support. So I remember hearing when I was very, very, very young and I was growing up, and it was right at the tail end of the Vietnam War, and there were soldiers coming home that had risked their lives, and many of them had been injured, and many of them had experienced horrific things, and they came home to a United States that was not embracing them and actually was turning their back on them. And so a whole group of individuals came home, many of them probably experiencing moral trauma, and then to have people turn on them and not even acknowledge what they went through in hopes that this would help help the country. So, you know, the trauma survivor was the individual who had to commit the crime, and not being valued, accepted, and respected, I'm sure, was very, very horrific for them. So certainly you could look at journaling as a way to heal. Journaling is going to be something where you just get those emotions out. There isn't one right or wrong way to do journaling. It's about reconnecting with your personal, spiritual, and moral resources. And so maybe it's just sitting down and writing ad nauseum until you can't write anymore. Or maybe it's thinking about one particular thing and writing about that particular thing. But whatever way it is that you're getting that information out of your body and brain and onto the paper is going to be very useful. Okay, the power of forgiveness. And I see we have a question from the attendee. How can healing take place at the organizational level? It's a great question. So with respect to the organizational level, it has to start from the top, right? There has to be acknowledgement that a moral injury happened. And when that acknowledgement occurs, then the leader, the person in charge of the organization has to set up the situation that can start that healing process. So making sure that there's individuals that the people within the organization can talk to, making sure that it's acceptable to talk about your feelings and there's no shame or judgment, making sure that everyone has an opportunity to vent what their experience was like, and then is there a way we could have done this differently so there was no trauma next time? So great question. Healing can take place in the organization on multiple levels, but that's one way to start. So, you know, when we think about healing, the power of forgiveness is always very important. What does forgiveness mean to you? And again, all of these questions I'm asking, there's not one right answer. Forgiveness for me might look very, very different than forgiveness for you. Do you believe it's possible? And that's going to be key. If you don't believe that forgiveness is possible, it's going to be much, much harder. How would it feel to be forgiven? What would that feel like? And if you can imagine what that would feel like, then how do you incorporate that in? And how would it feel to forgive others? Sometimes we cannot forgive ourselves until we learn to forgive others, or vice versa. So think about, am I able to forgive others? And am I able to forgive myself?
And I think that goes along with, making amends. Think about what it would feel like to make amends. As Carol said, forgiveness is very powerful. It needs to start with us. But there's ways, obviously, that we can, look at community projects to be involved with. We can go back to this idea of writing or journaling or, an apology letter. But I think importantly also it's about influencing changes in policies or practices. It's about, not looking at it and saying this is the way it's always been done, but, trying to influence change and be a change maker and, and do what we can to, make the world a better place.
And so sometimes healing is done through rituals. And if this is a way that you feel would be helpful for your own process, then that's fabulous. Again, just like the trauma is going to be individual, the healing will be individual, the injury and our morals are all individual. So if somebody says this is what helps for me and it doesn't help for you, don't feel obligated to do it. But if you're interested in healing rituals, think about a way to honor the grief and loss, create a ritual of cleansing or forgiveness for yourself. And these rituals are going to be very, very individualized. And so maybe the ritual is saying some specific words or doing a specific activity, but anything that you would consider a healing ritual. write an imaginary letter of apology to the person, and then think about what actions you could do to feel balance again. So compassion is a great way to heal. And this is about mindfulness. So it lets us sit with the uncomfortableness and the pain and the past and the painful thoughts, and then move forwards after that, after we've done this on an individual basis. And then kindness, being empathic, being kind to others, reminding ourselves that even though we had to make a decision that goes against our morals, we are not an immoral person. So having that kindness is a way to remind us. And then common humanity. Common humanity is connecting and reconnecting with a shared sense of humanity. All of us are different, but all of us are the same. We all want happiness. We all want to have a life that we love and have people that we love around us. So having that common shared reality and humanity about who we are and what we would like is really important.
Yeah, and it really starts with you, right? We've said for years that self-care starts with you, and there's a number of different techniques that you can employ. I mean, I always smile when I read breathing. I mean, we breathe to live, and yet we forget to do it so many times. There's days where I'll be sitting at my computer and realize that I'm holding my breath because of something I'm about to see or something I'm about to deal with. And so, correct breathing and effective breathing really goes a long way in helping with those self-care techniques. Breathing from the belly, mindful breathing. There's a lot of great applications out there that you can download that will help you meditate or focus more on um, of what you're trying to accomplish, and just really give you that idea of taking that break. I mean, when you really think about your breathing and you employ some of these breathing techniques, it really forces you to sit back and take 5 or 10 minutes to do it correctly, and you'll definitely see an increase in your well-being.
And then using other self-care techniques, that could be some Tai Chi or acupuncture or Qigong. All of these are, Qigong and Tai Chi, they're both very mindful activities. You have to focus on being in the moment. Acupuncture is a great way to relieve stress. Time in nature will be positively stimulating all of your senses. Music is a way we can get carried away from our everyday activities and just go to a place where things are better and we're feeling better about our situation. And we could also look at exercise. Exercise is good because that's going to decrease our cortisol and increase our oxytocin. Doing a body scan meditation just to check in and see how we're feeling and where we're feeling our stress. Yoga is a great way to increase our breathing and then stretching our body. And then creating a vision board. Creating a vision board that says, this is the direction I want to go now. This is what my healing process will look like. These are the things that I know I want to do and how I'm going to get there. And then also be gentle with yourself, knowing that you might need to make a turn, or you might need to do something different, or you might need to take a break from this. All of that is okay.
And we've recognized, years ago that, this isn't just impacting us as professionals, right? I mean, obviously we're in this space, we're dealing with it. We know that, some of us will be impacted more than others, but what about, that collateral damage, if you will, your friends, your family, your coworkers? I mean, we've started over the last few years rolling out our own mental health and wellness program to more than just people who are working internet crimes against children. It's easy to say that our analysts and our forensic examiners and our prosecutors and our investigators need it. But what about their families? What about support staff who may come into contact with this on just occasionally? What about our court personnel? We know that a judge and a jury have to see this, but what about the court reporters? Folks that we don't often think about sometimes who may be impacted by what we're going through or by moral injury of their own. And so, I have a lot of friends that are not in law enforcement. So, it's nice to be able to talk to them outside of that law enforcement bubble, if you will, because when we're inside of it, we oftentimes all think the same way, and we take our moral injury, our compassion fatigue, our burnout for granted. And so we're trying to involve those who are outside of our direct sphere, who may be impacted by how we're behaving, how our emotions come out. So don't overlook the fact that there are other people that are impacted that you may not necessarily think about.
And so how do we support? We can be attuned to their feelings. And what does that mean, being attuned to somebody's feelings? Looking at the expression on their face, looking at what's going on with them. If they're looking anxious or frustrated or sad or mad, checking in with them. Are you doing okay? What can I do for you? Understand the reluctance to share, because they're having to admit that they did something that goes against their core beliefs. And that in and of itself is difficult. And then to say, and I knew what I was doing. Listen with care and an open heart. So don't try to give them advice by telling them it's all going to be okay, or just listen. Ask if they've heard about moral injury, and if not, give them some information. Find them appropriate support. So finding them somebody that can listen, that can give them rituals that they might try, to see a therapist, anything that you can think of. Ask them, what can I do to support you? And then finding appropriate support for them if you are not able to accomplish that. So recovery is a lifelong process because it requires the restoration of love and empathy. And that's, again, she wrote a book about moral injury as well. It is a lifelong process. We have to restore the love and empathy we have for ourselves, for others, as well as for those who impacted the decisions that we made.
Yeah, and I really like that quote because, I'm still reminding myself daily that I don't have it all figured out, that, we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, we're learning as we, see moral injury occur, or as we deal with things like compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma and burnout. It requires us to, maybe adjust that process or try something else. And, we realize that, we're in this for the long haul. We want people to be in it for the long haul. And so, we're doing what we can, not only for ourselves, but for other people. So, I know we've covered a lot of material today. Hopefully, we were able to define vicarious trauma, PTSD, moral injury, give you a better understanding of those definitions. We discussed the signs and symptoms of moral injury and who can be impacted by it. We've talked a lot about some of the coping techniques and the tools. Those are obviously important to mitigate the negative effects, and then some steps to alleviate the symptoms and begin to heal. Because, obviously, if you're working these types of cases or you're exposed to this types of material, the good news is that you're more resilient than the general population. And so, hopefully that allows us to not only begin the healing process, but improve upon ourselves and, continue to be better day in and day out.
So wrapping it up, I think William's going to take over from here.
Yeah, just for the sake of time, if no one has any questions, we'll go ahead and move it along to William. If anyone wants to reach out to our trainers, our contact information is here. If you have any questions about our program, feel free to reach out to me. My information is here as well. But thank you all for being here. We hope you were able to get some valuable information out of today's webinar. And thanks to our wonderful trainers for having a great session.
Yes, great. Thank you very much to our trainers and to our colleagues. And so, yes, just want to remind folks of a couple of quick announcements prior to us departing for today. So as you all, again, see here, just a reminder, please note that we do have your certificate of attendance coming within the next 24 hours that you should receive in your email inbox. So please be on the lookout for that. If you would like to get in contact with us at INTAC, we do encourage you to please visit us on OJJDP's website through the sub-tab identified as INTAC, and please sign up for our listserv as well. We also encourage you to go to OJJDP's website if you're wanting more information about OJJDP, including their Juve Just listserv or any upcoming events that we have that we'll host, including webinars like these. We also encourage folks to please reach out to the help desk if you need any additional help there as well. Before folks leave today, I do want to encourage people to please take a moment to fill out the polling that is to the right of your banner there. If you click on the polling option, you should see a poll that pops up. So prior to you exiting today, we do encourage you to please take a moment to submit feedback to us. We would be very appreciative. Excuse me. If you have a moment, please go to TTA 360 if you have any questions about training or technical assistance needs. We will be able to take your request and triage it to the appropriate provider. So please visit us there if you need any TTA for your respective organization. Again, like I mentioned on the top of the presentation, we do have our webinars posted on the OJJDP's multimedia and YouTube page. And if you need any of those materials, we encourage you to reach out to us at the help desk. We have a couple of webinars coming up for prosecutors, including one tomorrow and one in November with our colleagues with the Zero Abuse Project. So we do encourage you to register for those webinars, including these additional webinars that they will be hosting in conjunction with us in November. And as always, we do encourage you to please be sure to go and sign up and check out OJJDP on their multiple social media platforms indicated here. So that being said, we'll go ahead and adjourn today's presentation. Again, thank you to our presenters and to our panelists, and to our colleagues over at SHIFT and the Innocent Justice Foundation. We appreciate you all very much for this very wonderful and helpful information for our ICAC professionals out there. Take care, and I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.